Diane is a painter, a sculptor, an installationist, and so she has many gifts and the outcomes, but they also want to know what went into the inspiration for the work and what you did to manipulate these materials and why you chose these materials.
New York, and doing my research, of course, the inception of blacks on the island of Manhattan was from slavery. And I did not want to do a literal piece. I wanted to do something that more spoke to the ancestral heritage and legacy, and from a spiritual standpoint as well. So I chose this material thinking about slaves, the idea of people of color. Clearly they were chosen as slaves because of their strength and durability and all of the things that they really were as people back then. And making the connection between that and these materials. We use brown paper for packaging, wrapping, and such because of its strength, but there's a fragility to the paper. And once we're done with it, we discarded it, similar to how slaves were discarded once they were done. I mean, when you think back to most recent history with African burial ground being found under the World Trade Center and how the slaves were buried in these graves just on top of one another, completely discarded and thrown away. So it made me think about that, and also the use of the paper really spoke to the hues and the tones and the colors. We tend to view Africa as a monolithic language and artistry and all of those things, so I wanted the paper to sort of reflect that. So that's why I chose this, and they're in three corners because it sort of represents the three corners of the world, the Dutch, the European settlers, the Africans, and the continent of America.
I mean, when I see the texture playing out in a way that is moving, you know, I feel like we're moving. We all took a ferry to get over here. It took us about 10 minutes to get here. We might have felt uncomfortable, but when you talk about the slave trade and all of the pain that was endured in that, you get that.
Yeah, you know, and I wanted to also represent that there was, these were people of great humility, grace, and elegance. And I somehow wanted to portray that in the work of art. Again, why I chose, because the paper was easily manipulated to a certain degree. There was some real consideration for it. Didn't actually know what I was going to do. I just came to brown paper and allowed the process to unfold, which is much how I work, because I work with everyday materials, things I would ordinarily throw away. So whatever happens, happens, and I'm comfortable with that.
And just want to give everyone a background, just who you are as an artist and your values and belief systems that come out and inspire your work. I mean, your Belizean background, Harlem, you know, lived in Harlem, lived in Italy. You're now, you know, working and doing work in Berlin. You have an international, you know, global perspective with this kind of ancestral that's coming to the forefront. Who are you beyond what I just said?
I don't know. I have no idea.
As an artist.
I think for me that's sort of a complicated question, because I can't really define myself as one particular thing. I'm a microcosm of every experience that I've had, so I can't say I am this particular thing, I am this particular person, I'm this particular type of artist. I'm a citizen of the world, and as such I create from that perspective. So I don't know if that quite answers the question, but that's the best I have to offer right now as a citizen of the world, and just trying to make art that speaks to my citizenship, that will allow other citizens of the world to be able to access the work, to feel, irrespective of whether or not I am present, that there is something that one can access. The texture of the paper, the way it's installed, there's some way that you can access the work, irrespective of whether or not I am here to give a talk as a citizen of the world.
Any questions from the floor?
And what about the shape of the sculptures, of the installation? Did it came by itself, or you did already have an idea of what it's going to be?
Much of what I do, I call it a cumulative, organic, and sometimes deliberate process. So for the most part, I come and I'll start at a certain point and I just let it unfold. And this process happened a few years ago when I was working with rice paper, which was a medium that I was not accustomed to working with. And I was trying to manipulate the paper into a particular thing, and it was not working. And what I soon understood was I needed to listen to the materials that I was working with, and it made me just think about life in general in terms of being present for your experiences, being present when you're interacting with people. So being present for the material and understanding, because I'm working with things that are of the ordinary every day, they're not conventional art materials, I need to be present for the material and understand, just do what it is asking of me. So I hope that answers.
If you Google Dianne, you'll see that she is an abstract painter. So if you had some of your paintings here, you could see the linking between your sculpture and your painting. How was it to transition from
the two-dimensional?
From the two to the three.
It was a much more natural and organic process than I would have ever imagined. I wasn't always an abstractionist. I fell into that sort of similarly. It was just a natural progression. I found myself being asked to create things that were of a three-dimensional nature, and I had no real experience with it. The first thing I was asked to do was paint furniture. And I'm like, I don't paint furniture, but I'll make you something. So that was my first idea that I can really construct things. And it just kind of grew from there. I understood that the same ability in the abstract expressionist work of form and color and shape and line and texture that were infused in the paintings came out in a three-dimensional forms as well. So there's a continuity to the work that's really interesting. I had a recent solo exhibition where I did the two-dimensional work along with the three-dimensional, and again, purely by accident, and it worked. You can see there was a dialogue between the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional.
And I see themes. I mean, with West Harlem Art Fund, you've done a window installation of Gumboot Juba, which is a slave dance.
Gumboot is actually it's a dance that was done in the mines of South Africa by the South African miners. And it was a dance that was developed to create dialogue between the miners. Their oppressors, if you will, did not really allow them to communicate with one another, nor did they buy them new boots as the boots got holes in them. So what would happen is that water would infiltrate in the bottom, and they found that there was this kind of slapping sound that the boots would make as they're walking through the water. That turned into like a foot movement and a slapping. Part of my research, I realized that there was a dance form called Juba that was done on the plantations, in southern plantations as well as the Caribbean. And these movements were very similar, and they came about under similar circumstances, which was based on a form of communication. The slaves that were brought from Africa were not allowed to do their languages were taken away. The way they communicated through music and dance and drums were taken away because they thought that they would be sending secret messages. So in turn, they came up with Juba dance, which we now know as tap. And there was a real correlation between these movements, and there was a free black man at the time named Master Juba who was going around the country doing this Juba dance. And meanwhile, there were enslaved black people, and this was their form of communication. And again, on further investigation, I noticed that these movements were very similar to African-American fraternity and stepping, which now Latino organizations do as well. So, which is also a form of communication. It's just interesting in these very different time periods, you have this correlation between movement and communication and sound. And what it makes me think of is the familiarity of the unfamiliar, because now each of these separate entities are unfamiliar with one another, but there's a familiarity within that. So.
Yeah, I highlight that exhibition because it kind of your voice for linking all of these historical, experiences, voices of people that were not able to kind of chronicle and archive their perspective and do your art. You're doing that and you're highlighting that for us. For that, and thank you, Dianne. Is there any other questions? I want to thank you.